Tracy and James, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How are you both?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, morning, Chris. Very well. Morning, Tracy.
Good.
Morning.
Let's start with the story that it got under me a little bit. So a consultation has been announced today from the Christchurch City Council, not the actual cathedral, to see if residents want to put more money in to help plug this funding gap of $40 million to $45 million for the Christchurch Cathedral that would come out of rates. James, to you first, as the Minister for South Island, do you want more ratepayer or taxpayer money going towards this building?
Well, on the ratepayer question, that's probably something for Christchurch residents. I'm safe and sound down here in Timaru, so I don't think we'll be being asked to contribute too much. But look, we've had relatively regular conversations with the Cathedral team about their requests, and they've got a plan to do a staged reopening, which we think is actually not a bad plan.
Yeah.
Whether the council wants to dip into their pocket to assist with that really is up to them. The government's been pretty clear that the economic case for it would need to be pretty strong and would need to justify investment over and above the other priorities, which would be things like, hospitals and schools and police stations. So that's probably where we sit.
Tracy, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I agree with James. It's got to stack up, hasn't it? And, when these questions arise, then there is an obligation to go out to the public and actually ask them, what they think and what is their priority. I'm kind of interested to see what that feedback's going to be.
Yeah, I wonder, excuse me, something's in my throat today. I wonder whether they're doing that because they wonder whether public sentiment has shifted. Because I know, to be fair, the casinos, the cathedral has been working really hard on that public relations offensive by opening it up to different venues and having, charities go in and dog things and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I guess they're probably hoping that maybe sentiment has changed and maybe the public's appetite has softened on this. I'm not sure it has though, Tracy. I think if people were asked whether they want more money to be poured into the cathedral, I reckon they're probably going to say no, is my gut feeling.
I think I share that. That's kind of the feedback I get as well. And so much time has gone on. I think the public sentiment from the early days till now is probably quite different. But we don't know until we ask, and that's what the council's doing.
So from one begging bowl to the next, the Canterbury Museum back at the begging bowl. This time they want more money. Why can't these organisations keep within their means, James?
Look, it's a good question. I've been there. I visited earlier this year, and look, it is a big project. If you see what they're doing with the all the reinforcements and the sheer amount of material they're digging out of the ground to make this facility quite a bit larger than what it was previously, I can see why it's an expensive project. I don't quite understand why it's blown out too much. That's more for them. Of course, the government's already put in about $35 million into this project. And I think what we'd like to see, I think there's been a proposal made through to the Ministry for Arts, Culture and Heritage, is what is the museum going to do publicly about raising some revenue on their own side? And we've done this through Te Papa, and we've done this through a bit more user pays around some of our dock estate. What can the museum do about maybe capturing some of the value from our tourists and from our visitors who are the ones that are getting most of the benefit out of the museum?
$64 million they're asking for, Tracy. It's a lot of cash for a blowout, isn't it? I mean, this wouldn't happen in the private. If you were a project manager in the private sector and you told your boss, you need an extra $64 million, you'd be fired.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and again, it's one of those. It's got to stack up, hasn't it? And there's so many major cost pressures across health, housing, and just with the high cost of living at the moment. So, I mean, I understand that they've done some value engineering, which is a fancy word for trying to get the costs down. Um, but on the other hand, it's actually it's a much loved city icon, and I know a lot of people will be quite invested in seeing it reopened. So, how invested are they? That's going to be the question. But it'll be interesting to see what happens between that sort of the bigging bowl, so to speak, as you've put it, not necessarily my words, between asking council and asking the government how they can bridge that gap.
Right, I'm going to start a mutiny now. James, what do you think is more important, or what do you think, if you had to choose between putting more money into the cathedral or the Canterbury Museum, what one do you see as a priority? And don't
Look,
say that's
if you
up to
had,
ratepayers to decide. Come on, give me an
no, no,
answer. What do
I
you
can
like
probably give
more?
you a proper answer on that one. If you had to make a choice between the two, I think that you would look at the museum as having probably more of a wider regional benefit. It does contain and carry a lot of our region's history. I went through their storage area, and there's quite a lot of cool stuff from mid South Canterbury through there as well. So if you had to pick between one or the other, I think there'd be more justification for something like the cultural and social value that the museum brings. It's not to say that the cathedral is not an important part of Christchurch, but if you were to weigh them up, I think on balance, probably the museum would be a priority in that pecking order.
Right, that's the headline. James Meagher says scrap cathedral. There you go. I'll put the words in you. Tracy, what about you? Just joking, James.
Well, not to make it worse for James, but I would agree insofar as I do think the case for the museum stacks up, which is not to be disparaging to the cathedral, and gosh, they've been through a lot, but when you look at not just the cultural significance but the economic case, I think that that is where my priority would lay.
You know
I
what,
think
guys?
one
Oh,
thing
wait.
that everyone would agree on, Chris, would be that the priority for the cathedral must be getting the square in a tip-top shape, because that has the, I guess, broader benefit of making it an attractive and appealing place for people to come and visit. So I think the way they've staged that process means you can then get local businesses and the council involved in what do you do to tidy up that area and make it an appealing place to visit, and kind of fix the final piece of that inner city puzzle. I think that'd go a long way.
I'll tell you what, I had no idea, and I went there the other day. Didn't realise there was what's that coffee place in the corner in the Christchurch Square. It's amazing. It's great people watching. Not coffee culture. It's the other one. Starbucks. Do you know that there's a Starbucks in the square?
Yeah, I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm always out of the loop of all those
Oh,
little.
where have I been? It's fantastic. It's the best place to watch the world go by. Seriously, and good cinnamon rolls as well. I'm kind of getting a bit sick of this. I really like the idea that Sir Bob Parker had once, and that was just, it encapsulates it with some sort of glass perspex. It's there as an icon. It's, for better or worse, it's actually become a tourist destination in its own right because people want that disaster tourism, sorry to say. And people still go there just to look at what it was. Just do that and leave it alone now. Thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I remember saying that quite some time ago, but it feels like years that we've been sort of debating this.
I know.
Yeah, we just need a solution, and I think the stage approach is probably the way to go. But it can't be at the expense of all the other things that are, potentially a bigger priority.
Just leave it there and put a big McDonald's next to it. That'll get the punters in. James, you have a lot to do with the airlines in your portfolio. Of course, David Seymour says the government should consider selling off its majority stake in Air New Zealand after the airline reported that loss. Thoughts?
Yeah, we're not going to be doing that, and I've got to be a little cautious around this because as a minister, there are shareholding responsibilities that I don't hold, but I do have responsibility for the wider sector. I think everyone would agree, whether or not you agree with David on his views on the ownership of New Zealand, is that you need a good, strong national carrier to support a country like us. We're not a big country. It would be hard for us to sustain, I think, multiple large airlines. We do want more competition. It's good to see Jetstar coming in and putting a bit of pressure on some of those competitive routes. We
Yeah.
also want strong and reliable regional airlines, which is why we're providing a bit of support for them recently too. But I mean, everyone knows that it's not easy to be in the airline business recently, but Qantas has shown that they can make a good fist of it. So I think with Nichols, focus on returning back to core business and back to the basics, and maybe, you know, different people put it different ways, but dropping some of the distractions and focus on getting people from A to B on time reliably would be a good way to start.
When you say going back to basics, what are you actually referring to? What are they doing that's not doing their core responsibilities as an airline?
Well, I think some people have criticised them for focusing maybe more on the aesthetic and more on the overall experience or the brand of Air New Zealand. And of course,
I
that has
agree.
had massive benefits to the airline and being an attractive airline to fly on. But you don't want that to come at the expense of service and quality and reliability, and also at the financial viability of the airline. Now, I'm sure that they would probably argue about some of that around the edges, but I think that may have something to do with it. Again, I'm not in charge of a very large corporate airline, and I'm sure those decisions are very difficult to make. But I mean, we can sit here and I think support the idea of having a strong national carrier with the right settings in place, and that's probably a good place for me as the aviation minister to settle.
Well, it's interesting you say that because when I heard about their loss too, I thought, well, if they'd actually just stuck to their knitting, that is, having their flights on time and forgot it, stop with the nonsense of what they want to do that makes it look nice, or their stupid safety videos where they spend millions and millions of dollars on public relations fluff. If they just actually stuck to what they're supposed to be doing, there'd be a nice airline. I've got to say, I actually prefer to now travel on Jetstar. They are more on time as far as I'm concerned, domestically and internationally now when I go use that service now. I forget about Air New Zealand because I get sick of all the fluff that goes with it now. I just like going on Jetstar because you get a safety briefing that's easy to understand. You know what you're getting, and they've really shifted their core business to try and get their flights on time. And I think that says something, Tracy.
Well, that's your experience. I can't say that I've noticed. I think Air New Zealand is a great airline, and we should feel very proud of it. Do I think we should privatise it, like the Deputy Prime Minister says he wants to? Absolutely
No.
not. It's critical infrastructure. We don't want to be at the mercy of probably overseas shareholders who won't have regional connectivity or good local
Mm,
jobs necessarily to the forefront of their priorities.
yeah.
Ultimately, we've got to we've got to start being more self-reliant and certainly not looking to sell out. The strategic review, I think that's now been started, will be interesting, and it may bear out some of those sort of complaints that you've just listed. But it's a good airline, and I always appreciate some of those things that set it apart from just a budget airline. Most importantly, though, we've got to make sure that we maintain absolute public control as much
Yeah,
as
I
possible.
agree. And I think James is right. And in fact, we are quite a small country. If we give this airline away to some international conglomerate, we're stuffed. I don't think there's any benefits in that. I just want to briefly touch on this move on order, James. This just seems, I don't know, it seems unkind. The government is making these move on orders to push rough sleepers out the way. Because as what the City Mission pointed out yesterday from Christchurch, saying we'll move them to where? And I mean, it just sounds like a quick, easy soundbite to get rid of a problem that should be somebody else's. I'm not sure this is a vote winner here, James.
I think what's been lost in the conversation of the past week is that it's not just about lifting and shifting people a kilometre away to shift what's seen as being an immediate problem. It is about being able to have some more options and ability to maybe move people to a place where there are services. I know Christchurch in particular has some issue around rough sleeping at the moment,
Mm.
whether that's in the CBD or whether that's out in the red zone. I sat with regional public sector leaders yesterday and we discussed this at length actually about what's the housing first capacity and capability in and around Christchurch. So there are some positives in this, in that not only are you trying to make the streets in CBDs and city centres a safer place, you are giving authorities and agencies an ability to connect people better with social service. And the one thing that we've missed in this too is it's not just about rough sleepers. It actually is about people who are causing unsafe situations and disruptions in city centres. And I don't mean rough sleepers or homeless people. I mean just people who are in the city, maybe causing issues or being aggressive outside of stores. Giving the police the ability to move them on actually can be quite helpful for small businesses. So there are many aspects to it, and I know people will disagree around the edges, but we think it's a solution to a problem which many people have raised.
Is that a fair point, Tracy? Because I think James is right. That has been missed in the mainstream media, that thought of, well, if you give the powers more power to be able to do something, then it does shift the responsibility back onto those social service agencies who all too often just say, well, they choose to live there. It's that same old kind of line. But they may choose to want to be on Colombo Street, but it's probably not good for their health, and it's probably not good for the dog that they're with either.
And I don't see how moving them on makes an ounce of difference to the connectivity that people get with those services. Certainly, if you talk to the City Mission and you talk to Housing First and the Methodist Mission, that is not necessarily what they would advocate for. On the one hand, you've got a government that have made things worse. They've gutted public housing. There's no, they stopped building. They stopped the new income related subsidies that actually make a house a public house. So, on the one hand, they've made the situation worse. And on the other hand, they're not even really providing what is a proper solution. It is just moving people from one place, like the CBD, into the suburbs. And I don't see how that fixes the problem at all. And it certainly doesn't address the underlying problems. So I think
That's
it's a
good.
distraction, not a solution.
James, is that a fair comment that we need to address the underlying issue here? And that probably is the cost of living, drugs, addiction. Should we be putting it more of the focus into those areas first before going, right, move along, please?
Well, you do both, don't you? You have to fix the underlying issues because that's the only way to get long-term solutions for some of these people who are at the hardest end of society and are our most vulnerable. So yes, you do have to provide the underlying social investment approach, but you also do need to deal with issues that are in and around city centres that are making people feel unsafe. Because when people feel unsafe, they lose confidence in the system and in the ability to go into those city centres. So you do have to address the problem at both ends. I would disagree with Tracy on the moves around social housing. We've expanded the ability for community housing providers to come into this space. And of course, they're the ones that come in with the social services expertise and they've got on site managers. And I think what we're missing out here is that there can be a better part to play between community housing providers, the government, and of course, iwi. Many of the providers that I sat with in the room yesterday were encouraged by the fact that if police had the ability or agencies had the ability to take people directly to their services, and that's part of this, that would actually go a long way because, as you mentioned, Chris, it's very difficult to turn up in the middle of the CBD and convince someone who has significant addiction or mental health issues to move from where they are, from where they might feel safe, but from where others don't.
Okay, we'll leave it there. James and Tracy, nice to speak with you. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Trace.